Yo, what is up? Welcome to the Awesome Dad Show. Today we're joined by fellow awesome dad, Jonathan Darby. And so John has been a friend of mine for a long time. I've known Jonathan through some pretty messy times growing up. He's a great guy, and I've really been impressed with John's ability to transform his life, to go from a do-nothing pothead to an actual executor at a high level. He now runs a business with his wife. He's got 2 or 3. Gosh, I can't even remember. Sorry, John. I think he got two little ones and just building a great life for himself. And I said, John, I got to get you on the Awesome Dad Show. I want to talk about the impact that having kids have on us as human beings and as fathers. But I also want to talk about that jump from being a after hours entrepreneur, from being a side hustler, to actually making that your primary source of income, and how turning your side hustle into your primary source of income has impacted you as a father. I find this very, very interesting because I'm going through the same process now. This show, by the way, is brought to you by Mark Savant Media, a podcast production agency. You can find out everything at marksavantmedia.com. If you want to make podcast production simple and fun, if you want your podcast production to stop being boring and to be simple and fun, go to marksavantmedia.com and I will be happy to get on a free call with you to see how I can help. Right? So head over to marksavantmedia.com if you'd like to simplify your podcast production and let me help you do it. Okay. So with all that said, let's get into this episode with Jonathan Darby. You're going to have a lot of fun. You're going to enjoy this episode as we really talk about what fatherhood means now and how building your business, how taking steps in the right direction can get you there. All right, let's get into the episode. Welcome back to the Awesome Dad Show, where we are talking to awesome dads about how to be even more awesomer of dads. I'm joined here on the line today with a good friend of mine, Jon Darby, from way back in the day, back to high school days. John, what up?
Hey, what's going on, Mark? How are you?
I'm very blessed. It's one of the things I love about podcasting is getting an excuse to actually get on a call and chat with old friends. And one of the things that's interesting to me is the way that life moves, because 20 years ago, we were not thinking about parenting and business and building a family, right?
No, we were not. No, I don't think that was on the forefront of our mind in those days. No.
I'm curious, did you ever think there was any chance that I was going to be a dad at some point, or did you think Mark's hopeless? He's done.
No, I mean, well, I'll say this. I said, initially I thought we were all hopeless, right? But, and I've told you this before, I think there was a moment where you transitioned from, just being an absolute clown in your 20s, right? Which I was right there with you. I was in the passenger seat and you were driving the old Ford Source station wagon there. But there was a moment where, I think, you had some brushes with consequences. Let's just put it that way. And you were like, you know what? My decision making right now is not good. It's not in proportion to, what I think I ultimately want to accomplish and who I want to be, And so you started making some changes and I noticed. And I remember being like, I remember asking you, I think one time you were going to talk to somebody. And I remember asking, hey, what's this all about? And, given, the little group of friends that we ran in those days, there was a good chance that I was going to ridicule you. That's just kind of how we rolled in those days. And so
that's how people still roll too. We're talking about like some mental health type of issues. I was speaking to a therapist at the time, and talking about therapy and mental health is not really like the cool thing to do when you're a 20-year-old male in the United States.
And and I'm pretty sarcastic and cynical just in general. And so, but I remember that you paused a beat, and you were like, well, I'm going to be vulnerable here. I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to say this to John, and I'm just going to let the chips fall where they may. And you said, I think I'll almost quote you. You said, John, sometimes it's just nice to have someone to talk to. And, you were so serious about it and you were so vulnerable about it that I was kind of like, wow, Mark, like that was probably the most mature thing I've ever heard anybody in my friend group say at that point, And so then you went in and, I hung out in the car for 45 minutes because I was a complete and total degenerate, I had nothing going on in my life, right? So then you went in and then you came back out, and I mean, and that was it. But it stuck with me. And I remember like, okay, Mark is making some serious changes. I think it also had a lot to do with like you meeting your now wife and you realizing that like, what you were currently bringing to the table maybe not that attractive to somebody who is wanting to settle down and have children and build a family, right? And so
Right.
you were like, okay, well, if I want to stay long term with Joanna, well, then I need to be making different decisions. And so you were doing your best, one step at a time, to make those changes. And I remember that. So. And it helped me later on, like when I decided that, maybe a couple of years later that maybe I need to do something about my life, in the shambles that it was in. I kind of was like, I remember Mark doing this. And so I kind of had a reference point to build from. So it was very helpful. So I appreciate it.
Let me, honestly, it means a lot that you would say that, because I think in life, just as men, as humans, and as fathers, you don't always, I think, recognize the impact that your actions have and the words that you say, the impact that they have. I think about that a lot as a father when there's always these little eyes watching. But I'm kind of curious. There's been definitely formative moments in my life, and certainly having kids, my first daughter, it really changed my perspective on life, on where I was trending. I'm wondering, what was your experience like when you had your kid for the first time? Were you already like on the right trajectory, or were you just like, okay, now we got to pull it together? Give me a little bit of context there.
Well, I mean, I would say I was already on the right trajectory. Not to say that it wasn't transformative, it was. But in my case, I
You've already been in the Marines. You
right.
had discipline implemented.
Right. So there were some things that I had done, so deliberately on my part, because I had to like hedge against myself, actually. And so I was like, if this guy just has full freedom and reign, like, this is going to be disastrous. We need to get some guardrails in this deal. Otherwise, this guy's going to go right off a cliff. So, I mean, the Marine Corps was a decision that I made. I mean, that was in large part a way to kind of I just knew that I needed to instill discipline, and that I didn't have whatever discipline I needed to be an adult out on my own making decisions. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that I was a pothead. Now at the time, I think that, and maybe this is true, maybe it's not, but at the time I thought like, well, I'm so clever, I'll never get caught, smoking pot. And so my rationale at the time was like, well, I don't want to wake up and be 40 and be on like, my couch or possibly somebody else's couch, watching Blue Planet for like the 85th time and being like, what happened to all my dreams and aspirations?
Yeah.
The whole like, I want to be an astronaut or a firefighter. And not that I wanted to necessarily be either of those things, but just that those things are aspirational for kids, and you have these goals. And like, what happened? When did I become content, digging through the couch for some change so I could go down to the convenience store and get some Funyuns, like when did this become like the ultimate for me? Right. So I decided, to join the Marine Corps because I knew I needed that discipline, right? And I also thought like, well, if I'm in the Marine Corps, to some extent, it's going to be very difficult for me to continue to smoke pot.
Yeah.
Right. So that was a lot of what motivated.
I know, a lot of people, a lot of which who do use cannabis, marijuana, alcohol, whatever. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I do think that it is really important to take a look at yourself and your life and within the context of distractions, because what might work for someone might be a complete disaster for you, and that's something that I've had to come to terms with as well. Like, cannabis, for example, is legal like all over the place. But if you recognize that I'm spending all my, every night smoking and not accomplishing anything, you need to make those decisions for yourself. Right. So.
Yeah, I mean, and I always, there's a tendency to want to sort of universalize the moral convictions that you come across. And I think in some cases that's appropriate, I have a moral conviction about killing other human beings. I'm going to go ahead and universalize that moral conviction, right? But maybe something like pot is, you want to take that on a case by case basis. What's good for some may not be good for others, or what's sin for you might not be sin for others,
Video gaming is this an example too, right?
Sure. Right. And just because it may not be sin doesn't mean it's still wise to indulge in, like you say, hey, I've only got so many hours in a day. In fact, it's funny, like even after the Marine Corps, even after, I became a Christian after the Marine Corps, that was a big thing, kind of trying to understand what I thought about my worldview. That was a major component of all this. But even then I had a couple of times, like, years later, where I spent like 2 weeks, on a sort of marijuana bender, helping a buddy through a breakup, or something like that. And my dominant impression was, one, this is making me so paranoid. I can't live this way. Like, I just can't do it. And not just from the standpoint of like, I'm in Texas and it's against the law, right? But also it just made me be like, I don't have time. I don't have time for this. I've
Yeah.
established myself in this community as being a certain person of certain ethical sort of, stance or whatever. And I'm jeopardizing all that right now. And then again, like, the whole business of like, I don't have 6 hours in my day to give to kind of like just, I don't know, just like,
To you.
yeah, just like listlessly kind of staring off into space and like thinking thoughts, man. I don't have time for that.
I mean, listen, you can still be productive, but again, it is, as a father, there's always
Yeah.
there's always somebody watching, and that, I think there's definitely a transformation. There was definitely a transformation for me when, I recognize that when you have a kid, all of your priorities change. It's not about you anymore. It's not about me.
Right.
It's about them. And, again, this is another reason I wanted to bring you on the show, Jon, because as you try to build a life that's more around your kids and whatnot, you have to think about yourself too, and what makes you happy, what makes you fulfilled, where the trajectory of your life is going. And I realized that I was trading my time for money. I was going to work every day for a paycheck.
Sure.
And, there was this one day actually that happened. I don't know, Jon, if any of the awesome dads out there, if you can empathize with this, but there was one day where I'm going to work and my wife is mad at me because I'm going to work. My daughter is upset because I have to go to work and I can't hang out with her. I get to work and my staff members are upset because they're having issues there. I get on a call with a client. My client's upset. I get home. It's like, what the heck am I doing this for?
Nobody's happy.
Nobody's happy.
Yeah.
I'm being pulled in all these different directions and nobody's happy. Like, what's the point?
Yeah. I talk to people a lot, because, we bring on coaches underneath us in our business, and one of the things I always want to emphasize to them is I say, look, there's nothing wrong with watering somebody else's garden. I think we've all done that. I mean, the first experience I had with that was, bagging groceries at Publix, right? So we've all done that. You water somebody else's garden, they pay you for your time and, that's the way it goes, right? But the thing I think is key to think about is that's you building their dreams, right? Yeah. And it's totally different when you're watering your own garden, right? Because you don't have to anymore, right? You're not obligated to. And when you're not obligated to do something, then this is just about something that you're passionate about and you want to pursue, and you keep 100% of the return, and I mean, I'm sure there's expenses involved, but you keep 100% of the return and you allocate it however you want to allocate it. That's fine. But you just show up in a different way. And you're so much more productive. Your passion comes through. People respond to your authenticity. You're just not clocking in and clocking out, right? You're building something for you, and I think that makes a massive difference. And people notice.
Well, it does. I mean, your kids notice. My kids notice. Like, there's a huge difference in a day that I've been working with my podcast production clients, and we produced a new show, or there's a new episode or new guest. Like, there's a difference between those days and the days that I'm bringing home the paycheck, right?
Yeah, it's not as draining. It's more energizing. Like, you're still working and it still takes energy, but it's not the same of like you just got back from the gulag. I mean, you're like you're very excited.
I want to stay on this for just a moment, actually, because this is something I actually think about a lot. Right, the quality of life in the world, and we'll say the United States, is pretty freaking high.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Basically, nobody's like starving to death.
Obesity's an issue.
we got problems. Don't get me wrong.
We don't know where to put it. Yeah.
But like, there's not a lot of people that are starving in the streets. There's people that, there's not like warring factions murdering each other. Like, there's a lot of the historically really challenging problems that people have had, that humans have had, we don't really suffer with. But I still think that, like, the quality of life can still feel just as hopeless now as it had in the past. You look at what's happening with kids and with depression and suicide, it's through the roof. That's something I think about. I'm curious on your side, Jon, how much media and television and radio and whatnot, how much do you let your kids consume? How much do they consume daily? That's something I think about a lot.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like them interacting with a touch screen, I mean, it's essentially zero. My brain's already fully developed, so I do interact with a touch screen. I do most of my business from my phone. Now, as far as television is concerned, I mean, again, it's essentially zero. Now we do have, the Netflix, the Hulu, the Amazon Prime things, and there are select shows, that I'll, say, hey, if mommy and daddy need a 30-minute break, then that's kind of what we do it. But there, we don't have, I don't think, a hard and fast rule as far as that's concerned. But like, if it gets to be more than an hour, I'm just like, go outside. And I kick them
Yeah.
outside. And we have a backyard. It's got a jungle gym. They have toys. Sometimes they say they don't want to, but them not wanting to is not going to be persuasive to me. I know they don't want to because they'd rather stay in and watch, whatever, because that's crack. And, the stuff outside is like, that's like nourishment. And I'm
Yeah.
like, hey, go get in the dirt, go, do this or whatever, go explore. I go out in the front yard with them sometimes. That, requires more of my attention, obviously, because we've got traffic. But yeah, I mean, just as a rule, my general thought is this: I'm not going to let the world raise my children. All right. And I don't know necessarily that every single, television show they watch has some sort of like nefarious agenda. That's not what I'm trying to suggest.
Right.
But I do know that the way that these companies design a lot of this technology, it's all about, this sort of endorphin response, or it's basically tapping in your endocrine system to make you feel like, oh, this is satisfying and whatever. You want more, 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 because the longer you're on, the more engagement, the more they can justify to their, to advertisers, and they can generate more ad revenue. I mean, they do have a bottom line. And so I know that they're doing that to me as an adult. And like, I am too cynical to believe that like when it comes to kids shows, they're like, oh, we're not trying to hypnotize your children into staring at this for 7 hours a day. We would never dream of it. I mean, I just know that's not true. I mean, look at the stuff that's come out about Instagram and Facebook, how it's like driving like self-harm in young women and suicide and all these things. And they're like, well, we've known this for a while. We tried to suppress it, or whatever. And so like I say, it's easy for them to, if they don't see your kid die or see your kid's brain get scrambled by whatever it is they're watching for, 10 hours a day, they're like, well, out of sight, out of mind. It's like me telling you somebody died in Germany. I mean, you're not broken up about that, but if it's like your neighbor who's German and he dies, I mean, that's a little bit more closer to home. So I think they can probably justify that. They do have an incentive structure. They have a bottom line they're trying to make. And so, I mean, for those reasons alone, and, you've heard the stories, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and all these guys that are like, Mark Zuckerberg, these tech, titans, they let their kids on social media. They don't let their kids have devices, because they know what they've concocted, so.
I mean, and I don't really want to get political, but there's a lot of systems and, a lot of programs out there, food industry, movie industry, big tech, like they all have an incentive, and the incentive is more money. They want to generate more money. And how do they do that? They keep you focused on what they want you focused on for, keeping you engaged. And that's definitely something I've been very thoughtful about with my children. It's not something that we grew up with,
Oh yeah, this is a new ball game.
Not fully ingrained. Like, when my 2-year-old like knows how to skip YouTube videos, I'm like, well, what are we doing here? And listen, I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but my kid was watching a extremely popular YouTube channel.
Sure.
And I was just kind of, listening over the shoulder, and I'm just like, I got upset actually. Because the show, they were singing this song, this jingle, the jingle was like, no, 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 I don't want that. Gimme, gimme, gimme. I want that. And I'm like, if my kid talks to me like that, it would be a problem.
Yeah. They're sowing the seeds of rebellion in your children.
Dude, I was like, no, we're not watching that show anymore. We're getting rid of all the stickers. We're done.
Yeah.
But anyway.
We've had to do that a couple of times, but for the most part, I think it's generally been innocuous. We've got a couple of favorites.
I really do think that's what being an awesome dad is about. And it's, I'm not just saying don't let them watch TV or don't let your kid do this. It's about just understanding that you need to be an active part of their life. If you're not an active part of their life now, you're definitely not going to be,
right.
and you're going to wake up with a stranger. I definitely don't want that.
Yeah, you need to have convictions. You need to be taking a position. You need to be engaged. You got to have a stance. There's got to be a theme here about what it is that you're pursuing. It doesn't mean that you're going to be 100% right. It just means you're doing the best you can, and you're actively managing your household. Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
So I actually want to segue briefly here, John. I want to talk a little bit about your business. I started, so I run a popular podcast called the After Hours Entrepreneur. I'll put a link below to everyone who wants to check that out. And the podcast really focuses on what it takes to make your side hustle your primary source of income. So you can really focus on something that really energizes you and drives you. And I don't know exactly when that date comes for me where I can make it my full time, but that's the goal. Now you've actually made that happen. And one of the fears that I have as a father is I've got a 2-year-old and I got a 5-year-old. I got to produce. I got to make money. I've been on a paycheck my whole life. Just kind of walk me through what was your thought process going from an employee to an employer within the context of being a dad also. Was that scary for you?
It was a little nerve wracking, but I kind of had in my mind some sort of metrics that I needed to see, before I felt comfortable doing that. And so that was a big part of it. I was at the time running a rental company. I have ownership in that company. And so to the extent that I was already in some sense an entrepreneur just by virtue, I wasn't just an employee. I mean, I was an employee. I was making a salary to run the company, but I was also an entrepreneur in the sense that I had a stake, so I was, very invested in some of the outcomes of the business, so
you're creating the business, right?
Right. Yeah. We had to build it from the ground up. I mean, it didn't exist, so we had to figure out policies and procedures. I mean, what are people going to wear? I mean, everything, I mean, it was an ongoing thing. But what had happened is that, my wife, when she had started this, she's super entrepreneurial herself. She had been doing some other business, and like I say, I was very supportive of her to do that. I just said, look, if this is something that, you enjoy and you want to do it on the side and it doesn't interfere with your primary responsibility, when this is just how we run things, household and children, if you got that squared away and you want to spend some extra time, if you want to take your Netflix time and shift it into, hey, I want to run a side hustle time. Hey, I'm all for that. And I'm going to support you 100%. And because we're both entrepreneurial, we talk shop all the time. Well, I remember thinking, the thing that she was, marketing at the time was, storage solutions, wallets, purses, things like that. And I just remember thinking as a customer, as a potential customer, once somebody's got their storage solutions and their wallet solutions and their purse solutions kind of addressed, I'll see you in 10 years,
You should talk to my wife.
This is not an ongoing thing. And so what I immediately thought about the business was, so I'm glad you enjoy it, and I'm glad you have some colleagues that, that you're friendly with. That's all great, but you're constantly having to generate, completely novel customers in order to sustain this. And that's just, golly, it's like you're bailing water out of the boat, but there's water coming in the boat. This is never ending, And so then when she did this, the weight loss deal, the health deal, obviously we had a need at first for ourselves. This is why we initially got involved with it. But the more that she was, so she started doing it and she started talking about it, I could see that you could build, a solid base of clientele, to where maybe there's water, coming into the boat, but the amount that you're bailing out of the boat is always going to exceed the water coming into the boat. And so I said, okay, and my question had always been to her, what's your hourly? Calculate your hourly for me. How much time are you spending with wallets and purses and storage solutions versus how much time are you spending, with client support, and yada, yada, yada. What's your hourly here? And it was clear to me, and I think it was clear to her very early, that the hourly with the health business was way higher, So, and the other thing that I think that she liked about it too was that, it was sort of chicken soup for the soul. Whereas purses, I mean, I guess you can get excited about that, but I mean, it's limited, I mean, this is not changing someone's life and their health outcomes. And so it's a new purse, this is great. I have a place to put my wallet and my cell phone. Woo, So then she starts building it, right? And I'm watching the numbers and I'm going, I remember saying very early on, oh, you're going to be making as much as me. like, oh, you're going to be making as much as me. And she was like, oh, pish posh, we'll see, whatever. She's being, humble, right? And then she pulled up alongside me and she was making as much as me. And I was like, oh, you're going to be making like double what I'm making. Right.
Wow.
And she was like, oh, she believed a little bit more the second time. But once she got to more than double, that's when we began to have the discussion of like, okay, now the other part of that is like, as far as leaving the other business, I didn't want to leave them in a lurch. I didn't want to be like, all right, well, this has been great. This has been fun. Peace out. Hope you can figure it out. I began training my replacement, long before. And I guess it's just sort of happened organically. The business is in a place where we were no longer building the lemonade stand. Right. And that's the part that I was fascinated with, was the building it, and I would run the business just so that I could see that what I had built would run properly. And so that's what I was fascinated with. But once it had been built, and people would ask us, is this a franchise or something like that? Then I was like, okay, this has reached, there's a diminishing return here as far as like new things we got to build. And now it's just about running the lemonade stand. And I had no interest really in just running lemonade stand. That was, mentally just, boring to me. So I got my replacement, and I got him in there, and he's a much better decision maker than I am anyway. He's a young guy, and I'm an owner, so we can pay him about half what we were paying me, and that was a raise for him, and so hey, get him in there, and there's a lot of opportunity for this young fellow. So we did all that, and it just got to a point where I was doing both at the same time. I would work at the business, the rental company, and come home and do all the coaching stuff. And I just felt like my mind was being sort of bifurcated,
Yes.
Like I had all this going on over here, had all this going on here. And it was like horses that, I was attached to both of them when they were going opposite directions, and they're like ripping me in half, and I was able to do that for like 6 or 7 months, but at some point something had to give. And I had one horse that was going really fast in terms of my income.
Yeah.
And I had another that was like, it was doing okay, and it wasn't like slow by any stretch of the imagination, but it wasn't speeding up as fast, And so I got to the point where I just like, I got to pay attention to this horse that's going really fast over here. And so everything kind of just led to sort of an organic separation. And as far as how I felt as a father, right, I think the thing that alleviated a lot of my concern is that, not necessarily recommend this guy, uncritically, but I'm a Dave Ramsey guy, right? And
Sure.
so, and not 100% endorse everything he says, blah, blah, blah. But, I have utilized his deals, to kind of make a lot of improvements in my personal finances. But I just knew that when it came down to it, like, we can get skinny. We can get real skinny. And if I need to find a job, I know I can find a job, just given my experience, and given my resume that I developed at that point, Now, I don't want to have to do that, but I knew that this side hustle that had now become my main hustle, it was never going to deteriorate at a rate where we were going to be having zero income and I had yet to find a job. Like if it became clear that, the number was going down and to the right, this is not looking good, that I had enough lead time where it's like, look, it would take like a year for that to go down to nothing, or to a place where we were hurting financially, so much so that like, I don't know why you don't have a job already. So I had some, I think, peace of mind just from that. It's just the way that you generate the revenue in this business. It's not like one stream. It's many, 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 many streams, So when you have a basic clientele, you could potentially alienate like 60 people, but you're not going to do that in a week. It's gonna take a year, So anyway, so that I felt pretty good from that standpoint, and but it was. I remember the first day, really feeling, the freedom of like, wow, I can just go and do what I want to do, but also, the sort of the bracing aspect of it is like, okay, it's on me now, and we got to do this thing, this, we got to make this work, or, we have to make this work. And I'll say this too, even with the job that you have, right, that you consider more stable, or maybe a more traditional means of earning revenue, right? That can go away too.
Sure.
I think sometimes we, in our minds, maybe kind of play up the dichotomy between, hey, it's on you versus I work for somebody. But it is still on you when you work from somebody. And it might be the case that, they decide, you know what, I'm no longer needing your services. And, they give you 2 weeks and they tell you to, hey, pack up and go home. So that can always happen as well.
It's
So,
kind of like taking, are you going to take the risk now or take the risk later?
yeah.
Because I mean, I definitely did not want to be, the 55-year-old person that didn't understand the new technology. It was just like a paperweight in the back office.
Right.
Don't want that. But I really feel like if you get stuck in that trap of just, I'm going to continue to maintain what I'm doing, I'm not learning, I'm not opening new doors, then that is absolutely where I feel like you're going to be. And honestly, I think that if you get stuck in that sort of mundane 9 to 5 type of lifestyle, it impacts your relationships with everyone, including your kids.
Yeah. I mean, because you don't feel fulfilled.
No.
Like I say, you're not building your dream, you're building somebody else's dream. And I guess the goal is in that scenario to find a dream that you closely identify with or that's near and dear to your heart. And so, maybe it isn't, draining. You're like, yeah, I want to, for instance, I imagine if you're an engineer and you go work for Elon Musk, that's like, that's the pinnacle, man.
Right.
I mean, that's it. We're building the future and we're saving the planet and we're going to Mars and whatever else he's got planned. We're going to download our brains onto a computer. Just give us time.
Right.
Like, so that's got to be pretty exciting for an engineer. Like, I don't know that there's a pathway or not an obvious pathway for an engineer to kind of get that same kind of job satisfaction, going out on his own, unless he's Elon Musk, and then he can do Elon.
Building your own business at home and whatnot there's an immense amount of challenges that go along with that. So, I think to your point, being true to yourself, being true to what drives you, I think is at the end of the day, that's the key. Because if you're not satisfied with what you're doing as a father, as a husband, as a man, it's, I don't think you can be an awesome dad if you're not okay with what's going on here first.
Yeah, you're not. I mean, you're certainly not going to be operating at 100%. That's for sure.
Yeah.
You're going to be coming from a place of lack rather than a place of abundance. So, and you react differently. So, I just know. Here's what I've noticed: my relationship with my children has improved vastly, and that's probably partly a consequence as to what you're pointing out, which is I'm more content with what I'm doing and what I'm building. That's probably one. But two, I'm just here more. Right.
Right.
I used to have like a 2-hour window because I was at the other business. I would leave at 7:30. Maybe I get to see them in the morning for like, a moment, but I'm getting ready. I don't have time to really. And then I'm gone all day. It's on the opposite side of town. I'm not going to drive home for lunch, whatever. I don't have time for that. And then I don't get home till like probably about 6 p.m. because even though we close at 5, hey, the buck stops with me. I got to make sure everything is, all my I's are dotted, all my T's are crossed, and lock the doors, whatever, right? And then from 6 to 8 o'clock, because my kids go to bed at 8 o'clock. I mean, that's my time to like be in there. And I gotta say, I'm depleted. I'm looking for some me time. I need to recharge my batteries before I can. If your cup isn't overflowing, I mean, you don't have anything to pour anybody else. So I mean, it was different. And so now I can tell my 2 oldest kids, my 5-year-old, my 3-year-old, my relationship with them is definitely improving. They kind of used to look at me like kind of askance, like this is that guy that just comes home and like, tells us not to do things, tells us no. Whatever, right? This guy's real negative. I don't really like this guy over here, right?
Give me 20.
yeah, this guy, man. So then, but like with my youngest child, like she's only 6 months. And even at 6 months, I mean, she can barely keep her head up, right? But I can tell that we have a funny little relationship that I don't have with the other two, even though those relationships are improving. It's just, my presence. I mean, time spent alone has gone up by, probably a factor.
Listen, that is people don't talk about this, but, I'll have maybe 15 minutes in the morning with my kids, maybe.
Right.
And then, some nights I get home, they're already asleep. Right. Some nights I'll get home and it's like, it's time to just like do the bedtime routine. And I'm like, and then, it's like, what am I freaking doing here? And then I'm working, as I'm working on the side business, I'm working on this business and I have days that I'm focused on that. I think that my overall, my cup poureth over and it allows me to help, those around me, my kids and whatnot.
I think that's 100% true. I mean, I think that's, I've definitely noticed that in my life. I can say that.
Yeah. And we got to strive for it. And I mean, at least for me, I know, as a father, I think it becomes even more difficult to actually take that leap because the stakes are so much higher. But for me, it came down to, well, what are the stakes if I don't take the leap?
Oh, there you go. I mean, yeah, that's the other side of that coin, right? Yeah.
And the stakes, I didn't like where the stakes were planted. So, by the way, just as an inside joke, our friend Chuck Leonard has a great joke about stakes. If you haven't heard it, ask him about the stakes joke.
Chuck. Oh boy.
Well, that'll be a side note, but at any rate, I appreciate you being here on the show for a few minutes, Jon, and sharing your insights.
Sure.
I've really respected watching you in the Awesome Dad group over on Facebook. And just watching what you're doing online with your kids. And I definitely can see the transformation manifesting and moving forward. So I appreciate you coming on the show, telling us about fatherhood, telling us about how your after hours entrepreneurship journey turned into something long-term, brother.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Always a pleasure.
Where can we find you? If we want to know more about Jon, where can we find you?
Honestly, you asked me this before. I don't have like a website or anything. The thing I would say is find me on Facebook, Jonathan Darby. I'm probably in your mutual friends. So if you want to go, lurking in Mark's friends list, you can probably do that. And the other place you might be able to find me is on Instagram. Again, look for Jonathan Darby. And there's some sort of like number designation. There's a lot of Jonathan Darbys apparently out there.
I'll tell you what, I'll put a link in the comments, but you can also find him in the Awesome Dad group on Facebook. If you're not already, you definitely want to join the Awesome Dad group. You're going to be a part of the community with a bunch of dads that want to have a meaningful life with their kids. Much like Jon, much like myself, come join the Awesome Dad group. Thanks so much for listening to the Awesome Dad Show. Make sure to leave a 5-star review right here. And by the way, I want you to head over to marksavantmedia.com. That's www.marksavantmedia.com. So you can get on a free call with me. I'd love to get on a free call with you to see how marksavantmedia.com's podcast production services can help you achieve your goals. Thanks for listening. I'm Mark Savant signing off. Peace.